We've all encountered the pesky pop-up that rudely interrupts our internet browsing. It's not only a nuisance, but let's be honest, sometimes it's also quite challenging. Gone are the days when you had to check a box or type into some blurry text. Now you're required to identify a motorcycle, a crosswalk, or even an invisible donkey. Whilst these obstacles are meant to protect websites from bots and hackers and AI, they seem to be doing a better job at blocking the frustrating users themselves. One would think that if AI is advanced enough to produce incredible technology, it could easily bypass the CAPTCHAs, right? And in fact, it's become so common that AI researchers have named their CAPTCHA solvers yet another CAPTCHA solver. And that was 5 years ago. It's not necessary to know how to code or develop AI to outsmart CAPTCHAs. For a small fee, you can employ cheap labor from overseas to crack millions of CAPTCHAs with ease. Companies like NoCAPTCHA offer this service with just 1 per 1,000 solves, making it a cost-effective method to get past these types of obstructions. Despite the accessibility and widespread availability of these solutions, websites still require users to solve increasingly difficult puzzles. CAPTCHA is not only a simple revenue driver for Google, but it's also a goldmine of data and millions of hours of free labor. In 2007 alone, 60 million CAPTCHAs were being completed every single day. Today, that number is likely in the hundreds of millions, and most of it goes through Google. They charge the same amount as CAPTCHA solvers, $1 per 1,000 solves. And if we estimate that they handle 300 million CAPTCHAs per day, Google could be earning 110 million per year. However, the revenue is nothing compared to the data they're collecting. Websites that require CAPTCHAs often offer valuable services like newsletters, waiting lists, or online purchases, making the data incredibly valuable. From hackers to Google's most valuable data collection avenue, CAPTCHAs have an interesting journey. Believe it or not, CAPTCHAs weren't invented to thwart hackers. They were created by hackers to bypass content screening and filtering services. Back in the 80s and 90s, text inside images was difficult for computers to read, especially if the text was distorted. Shady individuals started using obscure images with text as a way to communicate about unsavory topics online without getting caught by other content filtering algorithms. Hackers took it a step further by incorporating leak speak, a way of typing text using numbers, to make it even harder for computers to interpret. But in the early 2000s, 2 researchers from Carnegie Mellon University saw potential in the strategy. It could be used to trick computers for bad things. It could also be used to trick them for good things. Spam bots were a huge issue at the time, spreading deadly viruses and causing billions of dollars worth of damage. To limit the bots accessing certain resources, they created CAPTCHA in 1999, which stands for the Complete Automated Public Turing Test. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it was to tell computers and humans apart. It all started with a simple piece of code, just a tiny program that can generate these infuriating tests that we all love to hate. But at first it wasn't so bad. In fact, humans had a 97% success rate, making it an effective tool against the bots. But it didn't take long for entrepreneurs to catch on, with the first being none other than Max Levchin, the co-founder of PayPal and the company's CTO at the time. PayPal was obviously a popular target for hackers, as the company was offering new users generous bonuses of $10 to $20 for signing up. But it all changed when one of PayPal's engineers, David Gosbeck, had an epiphany. Why not use the hackers' own tactics against them? He pitched his idea to Max, who was already halfway done with the development by the next day. In 2001, PayPal rolled out the feature, and it soon became an internet staple. eBay and Google followed suit, and for years it seemed like the perfect solution to stop hackers in their tracks. But with all things, this golden period couldn't last forever. Despite the giant efforts of corporations to fend off hackers, the truth is that they remain a formidable foe. Hackers pose a far superior risk-to-reward ratio, with millions of dollars to be made if they can break through security of the tech giants like Google and Apple. In contrast, while such losses are inconvenient for these companies, they're by no means a top priority. These firms would rather focus on maintaining market share and creating the next big thing, which could be worth billions. As a result, hackers and researchers began to create AI and programs that could crack these relatively simple questions. It was evident that CAPTCHAs had to evolve, but individual companies found it too much a hassle to develop an increasingly difficult one. So, what was the solution? A centralized service team dedicated to staying one step ahead of the hackers. In a genius move, Google stepped in and acquired reCAPTCHA in 2009 from the original Carnegie Mellon researchers. It was probably a small price to pay for Google, perhaps 5 or 10 million, but for the researchers it was an opportunity to monetize their finding. Google, however, had a plan of its own, using reCAPTCHA for data collection, but we'll dive into that later. Google's CAPTCHA strategy wasn't just about stopping bots, but it was also about leveraging the power of human labor. Instead of generating meaningless text for people to transcribe, Google came up with a genius idea to get people to transcribe something useful. The company was digitizing the world's newspapers and books for Google Books, but their computers were struggling to recognize text from older sources. So Google incorporated these hard-to-read words into CAPTCHA tests, killing two birds with one stone. Firstly, Google's AI couldn't decipher these words, and it was unlikely that malicious AIs could. Secondly, Google could get paid by these websites and companies to transcribe these old books using free labor, and a lot of it. In the early days, people were solving 60 million CAPTCHAs every single day. Even if we were to assume that it only took 5 seconds on average to complete, we're talking about 83,000 hours. From clever beginnings to modern-day frustration, the evolution of CAPTCHA has been a roller coaster ride. Google's initial idea of using the hard-to-read text in CAPTCHAs to digitize old books was nothing short of genius. And the best part is that it didn't cost them a penny. They got free labor from people solving the tests, but as the AI's technology improved, bots became better at solving these tests. And Google tried to make the tests harder, but eventually it was clear that the tests had become useless. In 2014, Google announced the famous "I'm not a robot" checkbox that tested human imperfection rather than human intelligence. However, this solution had a problem. It didn't work well on mobile devices as there's no mouse. So Google went back to creating a better version than the original text, CAPTCHA. This new CAPTCHA used images of crosswalks and invisible donkeys, which bots found difficult to decipher. But as expected, bots quickly adapted and started mimicking the imperfect mouse movements of humans. This led Google into introducing reCAPTCHA version 3, which ditches the tests altogether and instead uses behavioral analysis just to identify the bots outright. Despite Google's efforts, hackers still use Google's own image recognition technology to crack the CAPTCHAs. With this updated version, the challenge is no longer visible, but it's constantly watching your every move. The system assigns you a dynamic risk score based on your behavior on a given website, within a range from 0 to 1. And this score determines whether you're granted access to the website's resources or not, based on the threshold set by the website owners themselves. However, the effectiveness of this new method is questionable. And given the history of CAPTCHA, it's likely just a matter of time before it's cracked. So, why do we still use CAPTCHA if it's becoming increasingly ineffective? The usefulness of CAPTCHAs has long been debated, with many arguing that it's no longer an effective tool in stopping bots. However, for Google, CAPTCHA still holds an immense value. Google used CAPTCHA to digitize books and to train their text recognition technology. Now they gather valuable data on human image recognition and website usage for machine learning and AI. Google's interest in CAPTCHA doesn't end there. They also collect data on our most important online activity, the activity that is usually protected by CAPTCHAs. As a result, Google continues to invest and promote CAPTCHA. But what about the other companies and websites? Why use something that's no longer effective? For most websites, CAPTCHA is not used to protect access to the website itself, but rather to protect specific actions like creating new accounts, joining a waiting list, or subscribing to a newsletter. With conversion rates typically hovering around the 11% mark, the largest websites with millions of visitors are likely to pay Google for CAPTCHA. However, even for those companies, The cost is negligible, with Google only charging about $1,000 per every 10 million visitors. Despite its ineffectiveness of stopping bots, CAPTCHA is still widely used because it costs next to nothing and may provide some level of extra security. Using CAPTCHA can also make a website look more reputable and as everyone else is using it. So while it might not be a perfect solution, it's still a popular choice for many companies and websites.